Hello everyone, this is Tom in Los Angeles. I hope everyone is having a great day and thank you for watching my channel and watching these videos about the Divine Comedy. Today I'm going to talk about Canto 27 of Dante's Inferno. It's Sunday, is Palm Sunday of 2021, and I'd like to make a couple of comments about this canto, which is a little bit more straightforward than Canto 26 in my opinion, although certainly complex. And in terms of the Divine Comedy musicality, it does have a certain softer and slower character compared to the previous cantos. We've seen such horrific and intense visions that Dante balances them out very well with a canto that is still within the 8th bolgia and no less horrifying in some sense, but a little bit more subdued and slow in pace compared to the previous ones. The very beginning refers to the end of Ulysses' great monologue. The flame already was quiet and erect again. And as the gentle poet allowed, the Ulysses was done speaking and leaving us. In verse 21, we're going to understand what Dante exactly means by the gentle poet allowed, what Virgil did in order to say goodbye to Ulysses, which is interesting. Behind it, another one, there are still, we need to imagine Virgil and Dante on top of this bridge over the 8th bolgia, looking down to the firefly spectacle. And another one is moving and trying to direct the sound towards Dante and Virgil. As the Sicilian bull, which bellowed loud for the first time, this is a really horrifying legend about ancient Greece, which in antiquity also included a portion of southern Italy, Sicily, and today's regions of Calabria, Puglia, etc. This legend says that a craftsman called Perillus from Athens was so skilled in especially sculpting metals and in acoustic technique that he was called by Phalaris, who at the time was the tyrant of Agrigento. Agrigento is still today a town in Sicily, to build a torture machine, a machine that would torture condemned people and slaves, that was fundamentally a bronze bull, a big statue of a bull in the shape of a bull made of bronze, and it was empty inside, but the conformation and the mechanics of the construction of this statue made it possible for somebody who was closed inside and literally cooked inside this statue with the fire underneath, to modify the sounds of their screams into something that from the outside would sound like a bellowing bull, something that was really atrocious. And Dante, to confirm the atrocity, the horror of this type of torture or idea or ingenious torture, he says, justly, the guy who gave it shape with his file's art was forced to give it his voice, because the tyrant Phalaris decided to test this type of machine, this type of torture, with him, with the actual creator. He was the very first guy, Perillus, to be put inside this bull. There was, since then, the legend of the bull of Phalaris. Dante and Virgil hear this type of cry coming from a flame, but they cannot really distinguish any word. Here, Dante explains the mechanics of how the condemned souls who are burning in fire can talk out of these flames. And the mechanic is that their voice doesn't sound clear unless it comes out from the tip of the flame. This is why as soon as the voice of this person reaches the tip, Dante and Virgil can hear him. And he says, "Oh, you, toward whom I guide my voice, and who a moment ago intoned in Lombard, now continue on your road. I do not ask you more. In many cases before, we've seen in Inferno that the condemned souls have recognized Dante as Tuscan, have recognized Virgil as Lombard for their accents. In this case, they recognize Virgil as Lombard for a particular use of words that he did. In fact, in English we cannot see it, of course. In Italian is istra ten va più non t'addizzo. If you remember in the canto of the hypocrites, there was a way of saying which is ne mo ne issa, meaning the same thing, which is now. This issa, apparently, in Lombard, in dialect, became istra, and this istra is the flag that makes the soul understand Virgil as Lombard. I can only imagine how scholars and commentators have been running around with their hair on fire because of this istra, because everyone is expecting and understanding Virgil to speak to Ulysses in Greek. And here we are to understand that he's actually speaking in Lombard dialect. So epileptic crisis and arguments among scholars, but that's just part of the fun. We don't know exactly. It's a theory, but it's probably based on this istra, and it's also possible that Dante didn't care too much about this particular distinction. In any case, what happens here is that this soul, this other soul that we find in this other flame, is convinced that the person that is hearing is just arrived in Inferno, and therefore can explain something about the present. And so it talks and it says, please tell me, especially about my region, which is Romagna. Today, Emilia-Romagna is a northern central region in Italy, where Bologna is, where Ravenna is, etc. And is it peace or war that occupies the Romagnols today? This is the question that the soul has. I hail from the hill country between Urbino and where high up the ridge the Tiber has its source, which is the area of Montefeltro. We know that this character is Guido da Montefeltro, a very famous Ghibelline chief of the 13th century. Urbino is a very famous medieval town, gorgeous town, lovely and beautiful to visit still today. The Montefeltro area is a very mountainous area, and that's where the river Tiber has its source. This is why Dante says that. It's just fascinating how across the whole comedy, Dante manages to cover the entire geography of Italy. One time he mentions a particular town in the north, then Sicily, then Sardinia, then Venice. So he's really building a painting of Italy to the point that some experts and even some historians say this is the extraordinary thing about Italy's history, that yes, there have been wars and everything all the time, but what gave birth to Italy, rather than a war, it's been its culture and its art, its literature, and in great part it's been Dante himself. Dante spent a lot of time of his exile in Romagna, in this region. In particular, he was in Forlì as a guest of a powerful family there, the Ordelaffi, and for some time, for some years. And then toward the end of his life, he was in Ravenna, which is still in Romagna. And that's where he's buried. His bones are in Ravenna. Here, there is a moment when Virgil is almost elbowing Dante and say, hey, this soul is actually Latin, Italian, so you can address him and speak with this soul and have a dialogue. Dante has the answer ready because he's been living there. He knows Romagna very well. And really, for the next 6 terzines, he gives a very synthetic and very clear chronicle of what's happening in the politics of Romagna in those times. Ravenna still remains under the eagle. There was the heraldic sign of the polenta, and polenta reminds us that Guido da Polenta, the chief of this family, was Francesca's father, Francesca in Canto 5, Francesca da Polenta from Ravenna. In the land that bore the long siege, that's actually Forlì, which Ravenna is under the green paws. Once again, the green lion was the heraldic symbol of the Ordelaffi, this powerful family. Then he talks about the old Mastiff and the new Verrucchio, the powerful people in Rimini, who are still sinking their teeth in there. Rimini is an Adriatic town of Romagna, today famous for clubs and tourism, really. Then we have a mention of the Santerno and Lemone, like the cities of... These are Imola and Faenza in modern town names. And then finally the town that fills the Savio Betis flanks, that's Cesena, another Romagna town. We are now talking about contemporaries of Dante, and he's saying to Guido da Montefeltro, this is there is no open or official or declared war in this area, but I know that war is in the heart of all these little tyrants. They would love to make war to each other. So there is certainly not a calm and stable situation. Guido has not revealed himself as Guido da Montefeltro yet, but he has a misunderstanding. He says, if I believed I gave my answer to one who'd ever go once more, as always, these condemned souls are so interested in their reputation up on earth. And in this case, he says, I'm talking to you, I'm telling you my story, because I believe that nobody who comes here in Inferno will ever get out alive, will ever get out back to earth. He's not only mistaken, but he's almost tricking himself in thinking that. And Dante, as a good chronicler, he doesn't stop him, he doesn't intervene to say, no, actually, I'm planning to go back. So this is the interesting dynamic here. As I said, Guido da Montefeltro was this very powerful and especially very cunning, very sly, gibbering chief. He was called the fox in Italian, la volpe, because he could really come up with ingenious ideas to win battles, and everybody wanted him as a strategist for small armies and battles. Guido was designated as most noble by Dante in his Convivio, this writing about philosophy, and his theoretical encyclopedia never finished. We think that Dante realized or came to know about Guido's big fraudulent action that he's going to describe later only after he wrote in the Convivio in praise of Guido. So there must have been a moment when Dante, having written his praises, realized that there was something wrong with the biography of this guy. And it's very interesting because throughout all the canto we can see how reality is stretched, and then there are mistakes, there are frauds, back and forth, just like in the case of Ulysses. A quick curiosity about Guido da Montefeltro. As part of his family, another famous individual was Federico da Montefeltro. And at least within Italian art, if somebody knows a little bit about Italian art, you must have seen this famous painting by Piero della Francesca of a austere guy with a very strange eagle-like nose. Part of his nose was taken off by a gunshot or something like that, and he was part of the family of Guido, Federico de Montefeltro. Also, this portion from if I believed I gave my answer to one who'd ever go once, so basically from verse 59-60 down for a couple of terzine, is included by T.S. Eliot in his epigraph to the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. So what did Guido do? Why is he here? Why is he here with Ulysses and all these fraudulent advisors? I was a man of arms, and after that I became a court friar. He went on many different battles throughout Italy, really, against Welsh for the most part. And then he had a moment when he, in fact, repented of something about his actions, and he decided to become a Franciscan friar. It's a unique story in itself, and everything would have gone well if that had been, if that would have been his life story. But the high priest made evil befall him, and who are we talking about here? We're again talking about Boniface VIII, who is the real villain, if there is one, in the Divine Comedy. The real villain of the Comedy is not the devil, but Boniface VIII. He also is being called the Prince of the New Pharisees, just a couple of tercines below. Led me to commit again the sins that I had practiced at first. So my actions in the flesh and bones my mother gave me were those of the fox, not the lion. He admits to being sly and deceiving and fraudulent, rather than somebody who's courageous. This fox and lion, in fact, is a kind of metaphor that we can also find in Machiavelli's The Prince. He uses exactly the same metaphor, and maybe he took it from the comedy. Then we have a reference to Ulysses of the previous canto, when Guido says, "When I saw that I had reached that part of my life when we should let our sails descend and coil the ropes," this kind of navy seafaring simile, and he decided to, he was penitent, he confessed, he decided to become a friar, Franciscan friar. What happened? Boniface VIII was making war nearby the Lateran, but he was not making a war. He's saying that this war was not a just war at all. It was not a war against the Saracens or the Jews. His enemies were all Christians. None of his enemies had been at Acre's conquest, meaning the Acre was the last stronghold of the Christians in the Holy Land, that was then crushed for the last time, I believe, around the last decade of the 13th century, 1291. So there was no reason for Boniface VIII to be so concerned with making this war, except for his own personal enemies. Pope Sylvester, in the times of Constantine, was said to be hiding in a cave in the Soracte Mountains because of the persecutions, and Constantine reached out to him because he wanted to be cured from leprosy. This is a simile to say, in the same way, I was already in my new life as a friar, and here I am, called by the most powerful person in the peninsula to help him. Now the big fraud takes form. What Boniface VIII is fighting for is he wants to raise Palestrina, which is a town not far from Rome. These enemies of his are Piero and Jacopo Colonna. They were powerful cardinals who never really acknowledged or admitted or accepted the abdication of Celestine V, whom we remember from the initial cantos as somebody who made the big refusal, Celestine V, when Boniface VIII took power. This is what Boniface VIII is proposing, that Guido helped him strategize on how to conquer and destroy Palestrina. At a certain moment, though, Guido is silent. He's very hesitant. He doesn't want to say or do anything. We seem to have enough documentation to say that this type of dynamic, in fact, is historically accurate. That Boniface VIII sought the help of Guido in order to organize his military operations in Palestrina. Initially, he didn't say anything, and then Boniface VIII, in a very devilish way, he told him, "Now look, your heart should not respond mistrustfully, for I absolve you in advance, henceforth, of the sins that you would do in helping me. Instruct me so that I can find a way to level Palestrina. I have the power," says Boniface, "to lock and unlock heaven, as you know, for the keys are two, whose worth seemed not dear to my predecessor." Is using words to basically say to Guido, "I'm making you an offer that you can't refuse. I'm telling you that I have the keys for your absolution in advance, but I also have the keys to excommunicate you if you don't do what I want." So Guido is now in front of a choice, to live in, to commit a sin, after he's been repenting or everything, or to irate the Pope, to have almost an enemy in the Pope and not do what he's asking him to do, and be excommunicated as well. Guido accepted, and he advised Pope Boniface to do large promises with fulfillments that are scant. It doesn't seem like a great ingenious plan, but basically Boniface VIII promised this Cardinal's Colonna to leave Palestrina in peace as long as his army could get into Palestrina, and he lied to them. So once that his army were inside, they razed it to the ground. There is something here to be considered. It's not just a sin that he's paying for here. Guido is also somebody who, in his recollection of this story, is clearly pointing the finger at Boniface. Is clearly saying, "I am here because of him, because of the high priest. It's his fault if I'm here, because I had repented." In fact, there is this beautiful scene where Saint Francis comes to, when Guido dies, comes down to take his soul, to take him up to heaven, because like he does with every one of his friars. And a demon comes and say, "No, this is my soul," because according to the Christian rules, it's really beautiful. He says, "He must be carried down among my servants, because he counseled fraud, and I have overnear his hair since then. For no one has absolution without repenting, nor can one will a sin and repent at once, because the contradiction precludes it." And a little bit ironically, the demon says, perhaps, and this is something that he whispers in Guido's ear, which is something pretty horrific to imagine. "Perhaps you did not think I was a logician. Tu non pensavi che io loico fossi." It's the principle of non-contradiction that the demon is using to snatch Guido's soul from St. Francis. So this is the story. It's definitely something that Guido is blaming the Pope for. And what does this remind us? It reminds us of Francesca. Francesca was another unrepentant soul who was in Canto 5, was in hell, blaming somebody else for her condition of a punished soul. And this really gives Dante the opportunity here in the following portion to give us a little bit of a theological explanation of about the presence of these condemned souls in hell, which I find it's something that people who are outside of Christianity or outside of Catholicism sometimes miss, because there are different stereotypes out there, even today. The fact that we all, as human beings, commit sins every single day, me, everybody, the Pope, every single human being does, according to Christian doctrine, is not something that is completely clear, I find, and to the point that it needs to be clarified that to call the condemned souls in hell sinners is inaccurate, because every human being is a sinner. The condemned souls in hell, Dante is telling us, is explaining to us, are the unrepentant souls. They are convinced they didn't do anything wrong, or they are blaming somebody else for something that they did with their own volition. So there is an interesting theology aspect here. The fact that Dante admits, like St. Thomas and properly like the Christian doctrine of his times and today as well, that there is the importance of conversion and penitence and repentance is much more internal in your heart rather than by some church authority, is also confirmed and proven in Purgatory. In Purgatory, where we're going to see, in fact, Guido's son in a completely different context. And it will be interesting because it will also further discuss and confirm the dynamics of repentance and the dynamics of how your heart and your soul is finding itself in hell, purgatory, or salvation in heaven. At the end of the canto, Virgil and Dante are, it's just a little terzina, but we know that they're gonna get to the 9th Bolgia finally in the next canto, canto 28, where we're gonna find Mohammed. It's gonna be an interesting, very interesting canto. The people who are being punished in the 9th Bolgia, they earn their burden by splitting things asunder. This is what Pinsky says in his translation. So it's a hook for the next canto. Thanks very much for watching. Have a great week and we'll speak again soon. Bye.